With us here in Washington is Aparna Pande. She's a research fellow and director of the Hudson's Institute's initiative on the future of India and South Asia. Joining us from Islamabad is Air Marshal Masood Akhtar. He served as a fighter pilot for the Pakistan Air Force for 33 years and retired in 2005 as a three-star general. Also with us in our studios is Michael Kugelman. He's Senior Program Associate for South and Southeast Asia at the Woodrow Wilson Center here in Washington, D.C. First of all, I'd like to open up to all of you. We saw big border clashes in September last year in Kashmir, the worst violence we've seen for years after the cancellation of talks. What happened and where are we now? Aparna first.
Actually, they are both short and long-term reasons. The current tension started, as you mentioned, with cross-border firing, statements on both sides, killings, and the cancellation of the talks. And then the long-term reasons are terrorism, Kashmir, and the legacy of the partition, which still creates a trust deficit and prevents dialogue between the two countries.
Air Marshal Masood Akhtar, is that your view of things, considering there was actually hope for dialogue, and then we've seen the worst border clashes in Kashmir that we've seen for a long time?
More or less, yes, but it's very, very unfortunate. We must recall that Pakistan has made reasonable, if not a lot of concessions on whatever stand it had. It has moved from multilateralism to bilateralism, removed the Kashmir problem as a core issue between the two and said, okay, we will discuss the Kashmir issue amongst the 8 as a composite dialogue. This was a huge departure. So Nawaz Sharif government 99 did that with Vajpayee. Pervez Musharraf continued. It is unfortunate that the talks had to be cancelled. Kashmiris are a third party to this problem. They cannot be ignored. They must be brought in. And of course, then the escalation that took place because the Modi government won these elections on the ticket that they are going to be tough on Pakistan. They promised that to the people. They promised that to the extreme right and to the RSS. And so the net result today, it's very unfortunate, needs to be de-escalated.
Aparna, you wanted to respond to Modi's election?
Yes, please. Mr. Modi's first act on being elected Prime Minister was to invite all South Asian SAARC heads of government to his inauguration. And that included Mr. Sharif. Mr. Modi has also pushed for economic ties with all of India's neighbors. India is still waiting for most favored nation status from Pakistan so that trade can improve. The visa dialogue has gone nowhere. So I believe Mr. Modi has tried to improve ties with all the neighbors, including Pakistan.
Michael Kugelman, your view on the situation. Is it domestic Indian politics? Is it domestic Pakistan politics that are leading the horse here, if you like?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Essentially, the reason why there's been so much unrest on the line of control over the last few months is that you have a political relationship between India and Pakistan that has just deteriorated completely. In Pakistan, you have a situation where the government faced a lot of protests, or a lot of anti-government protests last summer that really weakened the government and allowed the Pakistani military, which has always been strong, to become even stronger. And it really has much less of an interest than the Pakistani government in thinking about any sort of reconciliation with India. And in India, you have a prime minister, a new prime minister, who has stated very frequently and very publicly that his government will not back down in the face of provocations from Pakistan. So essentially, since there's so much tension in the relationship, I think each side feels it has less to lose by hunkering down and really not stepping back from all of these problems and unrest on the disputed border.
Air Marshal Masood Akhtar, is he correct, Michael, correct to say that the Sharif government have kind of lost control of the armed forces and that's why we're seeing such a strong stance over Kashmir?
Relatively. I think there is some truth in this. But what I wish to say is both sides need to understand that they should not be addressing local politics. They must rise up and become statesmen. And that means both sides must understand that the biggest national security interest, both sides, is to fold the extreme right elements that are there in both the countries and are egging both sides to go the military way. This is not going to help anyone. And it is bad for India, it is bad for Pakistan. We have just had a huge massacre, of course, of 140 children in Peshawar. We cannot afford this. Yes, there is some truth in this that the military is doing much more than it should be. The Nawaz Sharif government needs to rise up and show statesmanship, and likewise the Modi government needs to do a few things so that it doesn't egg on the extreme right elements in Pakistan to dominate. Unfortunately, this has been happening, and I would say that from the Pakistani side, ever since Nawaz Sharif government came into power and left, of course, in '99, and the Pervez Musharraf government, they called for ceasefire across the LOC, line of control. And ever since it had been holding, but of course there are non-state actors this side and that side who are stirring up a lot of trouble.
Was the Peshawar massacre upon a turning point? Because there were some statements that came out of Islamabad that said, look, we're not going to differentiate between good terrorists and bad terrorists. One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighters. You think that, if you like, could be even a silver lining of an approach going forward?
We would hope so. However, we have yet to see anything really happening on the ground. For example, the Pakistani government was supposed to have made a statement that they would ban Jamaat-ud-Dawa and Haqqani Network. It's not happened, and actually Jamaat-ud-Dawa is having a rally on January 25th, a public rally. Yes, there are people. I believe that Pakistani civilians do want to move forward. The question is that can Pakistan's military and intelligence, which have actually had a policy of using jihad as a part of their foreign and security policy, actually give it up? And if they do, then they'll have to do a lot more on the ground. Right now, for example, at the start of the border conflict between India and Pakistan, a statement was made that Pakistan cannot act on its western frontier because it's preoccupied with India. But that's an excuse we've seen for almost 3-4 decades. It's not new.
I'm glad you brought up Afghanistan, because there have been also accusations to New Delhi that they are sponsoring groups to hem in and attack Pakistan. Is there any truth to that, Michael? Is there a sort of proxy war going on the western border as well?
Yeah, I mean, certainly this is an argument that one hears, the sense of a proxy war. I mean,
Is it right?
Well, I mean, certainly this requires some sense of context. I think that it's very clear that the tribal areas of Pakistan are being used as a staging ground for attacks into Afghanistan. Certainly there have been suggestions that Afghanistan actually is giving sanctuary to elements of the Pakistani Taliban, which it then uses as staging ground to send assaults back into Pakistan. And I think that there's good reason to believe that there is something there, but my sense is that on the Pakistani side, there's just been a clear track record of this happening for such a long time and over such a long period, and I think that's where the major focus has to be.
What would you say to that, Air Marshal Masood Akhtar?
I would agree with the lady when she says that yes, Jamaat-ud-Dawa and Lashkar-e-Taiba and these elements have been strong in Pakistan. I would very carefully say that they were egged on. The people of Pakistan and the people of India want to get together, and they want to normalize relations. Both governments must help one another. But the silver lining is that now the army has clearly said they're going to handle all Taliban, good or bad. Of course, there have been difficulties. When they went to the UK, General Raheel Sharif and his DG ISPR were at length trying to say that, look, Haqqani group and likewise all the Taliban within Pakistan are going to be attacked and they're going to be taken care of. But of course, this is going to take time. So this is a silver lining. National security policy in Pakistan, in my view, has undergone a sea change after Peshawar.
What do you say to that, both of you? We've got to go to a quick break in a minute, but Michael, do you recognize that?
No, I tend to be a skeptic here. I think that, unfortunately, Pakistan is really going to feel a strategic need to keep distinguishing between good and bad militants. It has always seen these militants that target only the Pakistani state as the major threat. And let's face it, the Peshawar attacks were carried out by the Pakistani Taliban, a group that attacks the state. They were not carried out by the Lashkar-e-Taiba or a group like that.
I agree with Michael that I have yet to see any evidence on the ground that the Pakistani state is willing to act against groups which attack its neighbors and other countries. It's solely focused on the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, not the other groups.
Interesting. We're going to take a break now.